Whether on the field, on the court, or on the balance beam, there's more to winning than the final score. Hi, I'm Patrick Manning of Black Desert Resort. We recognize the effort it takes to succeed. That's why we are proud to partner with the Utah Checkdown, the podcast that tells you the story before the game, then gives you a recap of what happened when it's all over. The grit, the glory, and the disappointments. Join us for stories of Utah's finest athletes and coaches. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to the Utah Checkdown podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown podcast. I am Josh Furlong and happy to be with you today. I'm sitting in a makeshift studio that I've created for myself in the Triad Center. And so it's a little bit different. So we're going to see how this goes. There's a few more people in the building than usual. So we're going to see how this goes and hopefully not have too many distractions. So before we jump into this podcast, I want to tell you about our sponsors, Black Desert, who are helping with the KSL.com Beyond the Game video series. The videos highlight various athletes and give an inside look into their life. Recently, we talked with former Utah offensive lineman Garrett Bowles about how a second chance at life allowed him to pay it forward to troubled youth. You can check out that video and many others on KSL.com. Black Desert is a new resort destination in St. George that features a championship Tom Weiskopf 19-hole golf course that combines a private club feel with destination resort golf amid lava fields and 360-degree vistas. Black Desert is changing entertainment in southern Utah, and they're just beginning. Black Desert, where remarkable is within reach, home of the Black Desert Championship PGA Tour. And that finished yesterday, Sunday. Today's Monday, and so it was a successful outing for all at the Black Desert Championship. So curious to see how that continues to develop. Beautiful scenery. But yeah, let's move on to football. So this is the episode that I know everybody's looking forward to. And I say that obviously tongue-in-cheek, knowing that not many people want to listen to any recap of that game. But we're going to get everything out. We're going to recap Utah's loss. It was a 27-19 loss to Arizona State. And kind of talk about everything that took place. So it was an emotional game for all these players, right? Like as you would expect, a loss is an emotional thing. But I think the way this game went about, especially since despite all of the troubles that Utah had, and we'll get into all of these as much as possible, Utah really still had a chance at the end, right? It's a one-score game. Utah was driving late in the game and had a chance to win. So Arizona State is improved. I will say that. They made the right amount of things to be able to get a win. But this is a team that, I'm not going to quite say that Utah beat itself. It 100% did. Arizona State did, they won this game. So I'm not giving them credit because they were the better team that day, right? And that's the nature of this game. And you've got to be able to come out there and take what these teams give you, and Utah just wasn't there. So, but as I said, it was an emotional time. Junior Tafuna got really choked up in the press conference, had a really hard time kind of addressing it. This is one of those games that was just much more emotional on the players than I've ever seen them, especially on the football side. I've seen this a lot more on the basketball side and in other scenarios. But this was one of those games where Utah absolutely knows that this is a team that they should beat, that they should win. They know the talent in that room, and they know that, although they are hampered a bit by injuries, that's never going to be the excuse, especially this year where it wasn't as bad as last year. But this is a team that just simply couldn't get it done, right? And we're gonna get into that. But first, today, Kyle Whittingham had talked about the Cam Rising situation. We'll get into the Cam Rising situation, what everything went, but he ruled out Cam Rising, said he's out indefinitely, and that Isaac Wilson is the starter. So let me just play that audio just so you can get what Kyle said, and we can kind of go from there.
I'll start out by saying that Cam Rising is out indefinitely, lower leg injury. Isaac Wilson will be our starter until further notice. And That way we don't have to address that each time we talk, and let you know where it's at. And can't give you a timeline. Could be the rest of the season. I'm not sure exactly, but I know it's going to be a minute.
It's going to be a minute, and that could mean his entire career, right? This is a situation where Cam Rising went into the game. He finally gets the start after not being healthy for the last little bit, and you can tell that he's still not healthy. Pre-game, I said that he was throwing better. There was much better zip on the ball. I know that's been the phrase that everybody wants to use, and at the end of that game, there's a lot of people that want to try to pull receipts and say that there was no zip ever on the ball. The reality is that Cam Rising got rolled up on early in the game. It was about 3 plays in. Defender kind of spun him around, twisted him, and landed on his right calf as he kind of forced him back, and that forced Cam to grab at his leg and then stand up, and he started limping. At the time of the injury, we see him coming up limping, and I didn't really make a ton of it other than he was limping, and you're like, okay, great. What now do we have to report on with Cam? But the reality is it hampered him quite a bit, right? And I didn't see the severity of it until we got to see a close-up video of it behind the line of scrimmage video that was posted on Twitter, and I got to see it, and you can absolutely see him get rolled up on. Honestly surprised that he played that game. This is an injury that had to have hurt tremendously. Kyle Whittingham said after the game that adrenaline can be a crazy thing, and it can kind of force you to keep going and make you feel like you can do whatever you need to. But the reality is Cam just wasn't healthy. He was already still a bit hampered by his hand. I would say that he had improved, but he wasn't fully healed, right? I mean, I think everybody knows that when you still have to wear a glove, you're not fully healed. But I think, I don't know this officially, but I think, he kind of got tired of hearing from people saying that he's just trying to scam Utah out of money and that he's just trying to sit on the sidelines. The reality is he was never healthy. Right. I mean, there was a huge desire from everyone involved, including himself, to be able to get on that field and to play. And as it started to get closer to that game, it shifted more. As I said, Isaac had taken all of the reps the week beforehand. The week of the Arizona State game, Cam did start taking all those reps, and I said it was trending in the right way, and it was. Cam was never going to be healthy, at least for that game. But he was going to give it a go and try to see. And, I'm not dumb. I know that the hand hampered him, but I have to imagine that foot injury or the leg injury, which I would assume, I haven't heard this from anybody, but I would assume it's probably something like a high ankle sprain. Maybe it's a meniscus tear. I know there's, doctors on Twitter want to say what they are. But this is it's an injury nonetheless that is going to keep him out for quite a while, if not for the season. And so, it's a tough situation to kind of be in that, where you're trying to give it your all. You're trying to do everything that you need to. Everybody watching that game, whether it was the broadcasters to the fans to anybody in the press box, everybody saw that he just wasn't 100%, right? I would have loved to have seen what he could have possibly done without the leg injury. Maybe he was, 75%, and that gives him something. Maybe it was more than that, and he could make those throws a little bit better. But the reality is he just wasn't there, right? Like it just wasn't in a situation that worked for Cam. And now, after all that's going to be the image that a lot of fans see when they think of Cam Rising, which is unfair to him. I know he's taken a lot of heat these last 2 years to no fault of his own. I know the messaging around Utah has been terrible. It hasn't been great. There hasn't been a good situation in terms of how they've handled this injury. There's a much better approach that you can handle, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend to tell you all the answers of how it could have been handled outside of maybe giving an estimated timeline just to help people understand where he's at, right? Even now, I think everybody kind of assumes that this is the end just because of where the nature of the injury and how many games are left, as well as kind of projecting the future and saying, look, we've got to go with Isaac Wilson. So I mean, and, barring some miraculous recovery, which I don't foresee, this becomes the Isaac Wilson show. And, we'll get into more of that later, maybe not even today, but more of that later in terms of kind of what that means for Isaac and everything. But this is an unfortunate thing for Cam Rising. You don't ever want to see a player go out like this. You want to see them go out on their own accord. And Cam was one of those guys that absolutely could have, right? I mean, he's been handicapped by injuries his entire career. Anytime he's come to Utah, he obviously had the shoulder injury in that 2020 season where he was named the starter and gets injured a few plays into that game, has to miss the rest of the season. The next season, they didn't feel like he was fully there yet. The rust hadn't been kicked off, and they go with Charlie Brewer, and then he takes the job over from him in the San Diego State game, and the rest is history. Wins back-to-back Pac-12 championships, and Cam Rising kind of secured his legacy at Utah. But then, that knee injury and then his hand injury and then now another maybe knee or leg injury, really it's just kind of hampering a lot of what people are going to remember, unfortunately, because he was a dynamic player, likely never a player that was ever going to sniff the NFL. He just, he was getting older. The injuries caused some problems. He didn't have the best arm in terms of being able to get down the field that well. He was still able to do what he needed to, but he doesn't have that arm that you look at and you say, holy cow, he can hit every single spot of the field. He's got a good throwing motion that way. It just, his whole career has essentially been kind of surrounded by injury, unfortunately. And you hate to see that for players. There's, players in professional leagues that you see this where they have tremendous talent, but they just can't get over the injuries. And so that's kind of, that's tough. So, if you're looking at this, it's a tough thing for Cam. It's a tough thing for Utah because I don't think there's anybody out there that says that going into this season that Isaac Wilson would have given Utah the best chance. That's not to say Isaac isn't a great or talented quarterback that's going to get there. But I think you're looking at it. You have a veteran quarterback who knows the system in and out. Andy Ludwig's offense, as we've talked about many times, is very difficult to learn. And you have a guy that understands it tremendously. He knows what to do. He can read the defense as well and do what he needs to. And now you don't have him, and you haven't had him pretty much for the entire year. Crazy enough, this is the first game that Cam has started, and finished since the 2022 season. So tough break. I don't know what this will entail. There is conversations about him potentially getting an 8th year. I don't think that's legitimate. I've got an audio clip here, and let me play that actually because it talked about in this game. There was a lot of talk. I mean, a lot of talk in terms of should Utah take Cam Rising out of the game at halftime. Probably should have happened before that, truthfully. But there at halftime felt like a natural break point where, you can go into the locker room, you can kind of assess how things are going and then change it. After the game on Friday, Kyle Whittingham this to say. Kyle, obviously you get Cam back, but was there any conversation maybe at halftime knowing that he was injured to switch him up? Or?
No, he wanted to play, and he felt very strongly that he wanted to stay in the game, and he's won a bunch of ball games for us. It was very apparent that he's not at 100%, but it's coaching decision to decide who gives you the best chance to win the game, and that's who you put in there. And like I said, Cam has been terrific for us in the past, and you can see the rust. It was 3 weeks off, 4 weeks, whatever it's been. But he's a heck of a quarterback, and he'll bounce back.
That was like I mentioned, the immediacy of the game. That was Friday night. I followed up that question today because I wanted to see if, in retrospect, if Kyle had maybe thought that they shouldn't have hung on too long. And I'll give more insight on what I think that means, but I'm going to play this and we'll go from there. Kyle, in retrospect, did you keep Cam in the game too long? What's your thoughts?
Cam is a warrior. Wanted to play. That we really moved the ball at the end of the first half and thought, okay, even though we didn't, get in the end zone, and then move the ball well the first drive of the second half. And Cam, we had that thought, would that be a move that we would make? But he wanted to finish, and he's a seasoned vet. He would let us know if he felt like he was not being effective enough, and so we did not make the move, and that's that. That was the decision that really our offensive coaches came to, and our coordinator and quarterback coach. So that's where we're at with that.
Kyle, given Cam's injury is out indefinitely, was there any conversation about potentially using that 8th-year medical redshirt waiver?
No, but there will be now. Now that we're in the situation that we're in, that's a possibility. I think. I don't know. Again, we have to explore it in detail with the compliance, and I'm not even sure Cam would be interested in going that route. He's got a lot to think about, and so just take a step back right now. Let him get this most recent injury thoroughly diagnosed and on the road to rehab, and then that would be something we'd talk about sooner rather than later.
All right, so touching on that last point before I get into the other stuff, I don't see a scenario where Cam Rising will exercise an 8th season, whether it's available to him or not. And there's some question about kind of if it being available to him. There's partially a new NCAA rule that any player that had been playing at the time when the NCAA still mandated a sit-out year for a transfer, that's that they're essentially giving these guys an extra year. Cam, in theory, would have qualified for that. There's been a lot of questions about whether he could or not. At the end of the day, this is not a scenario where I think Cam wants to come back, right? I know you don't want this to be the end of the season or end of your career in terms of how it goes down, and I think that it makes it a difficult challenge and may force people to say, oh yeah, I want to go out and go on a high term, right? But I think you're getting this far into your career, your age, and just kind of the nature of everything. I would be very surprised if Utah even wants him back, and that sounds harsh, but you have to look to your future. You have to look at this and say, Isaac Wilson is the future, and you've got to be able to move forward. You can't continue to have an injured quarterback kind of handicap the team in terms of knowing if you're there or not. It's not a great situation for all involved because they love Cam, right? This is not a situation where Cam fell out of favor because he just wasn't good and somebody passed him up. This is a situation where injuries absolutely derailed his career, and you want him to be able to move on in the right way, but unfortunately injuries, they come when they come, and there's not much you can do to that. So I would be surprised if any entertainment is given to wanting to take an 8th year, whether that be from Cam Rising's party or from Utah. I have to imagine this is just kind of the natural split between the programs, and Cam gets celebrated for his accomplishments, and there are a lot of accomplishments, and obviously he could have had more, and there's going to be a lot of talk from everybody around Cam, but at the end of the day, he did exactly what he needed to for Utah, help them to 2 Pac-12 championships, put Utah on the map in a lot of ways to help them get to where they needed to. But there comes a time where you kind of just have to move on, and I think that's where Utah's at. So you're kind of at that inflection point where you have to say, okay, great, thanks, Cam, but at the end of the day, we've got to move on and go with Isaac Wilson. So like I said, I don't imagine that becomes a scenario. We'll still monitor that and kind of see how it goes, but I have to imagine that this is a situation where he's done, rides out to the sunset, so to speak, and kind of this is the end of the Cam Rising tenure at Utah, and you can have your own emotions for that and on what you feel that is, but tough situation all around. Now going back to the situation in the game, because I think this is a situation where Kyle Whittingham is an incredibly loyal person, and he's made savvy moves and he's done things to be able to help his team grow, and has had to unfortunately let go of coaches that he didn't feel like were pulling their weight at Utah for whatever reason. So it's not that he can't do this. The problem is he's much more loyal to the cause than trying to be cutthroat, right? Like this is a business that is tough, and you can't hold on to these things too long, or else it passes you by, and then you're the one that's on the hot seat. Kyle's ridden a lot of that stuff, He's ridden that hot seat wave. Obviously, the back-to-back 5-7 seasons years ago and early on in the Pac-12, he rode that wave and, was on the chopping block, so to speak, and was able to get some help to stay out. And now he's, seemingly this untouchable coach that will go out on his own time. And, whether that be this year or another year, I think it's getting closer regardless. And obviously this is not the way that he wants to go out either. But there comes a point where, this loyalty to Cam Rising and for what he did for Utah, I personally think got in their way on Friday. You see a guy that, you're hearing all this noise, whether that be from us as the media asking all these questions, is he going to play, or the fans who, there's some subset of the fans that have been relentless towards this about how Cam Rising is faking injury or he's just trying to milk money. Once again, I'm dispelling all that. That's not how this is. You can see that he wasn't healthy. A tough situation for him and not great, but you hear a lot of that noise, right? And I think that kind of forces your hand in some ways to feel like you have to play. And I'm not saying that Kyle or Cam forced his return on Friday just to be able to appease fans, because at the end of the day, they don't owe it to anybody. They owe it to the health of the player and to the program. So if that is the case, that's up to them. I wouldn't be... I'd have to say I have to imagine as that noise gets louder, it becomes much harder to not listen to it, though. And I think there became a situation where you're trying to rush Cam back in quicker timeline than maybe his body was ready. But at the end of the day, you didn't foresee another injury, right? You didn't see that he was going to get injured, on the third play or whatever it was, and derail what was going on. If there was a few errant passes, from Cam because, maybe his grip wasn't as great as it needed to be, you can live with that. But, a game like what took place on Friday is just unacceptable, honestly. And I think there comes a situation where Kyle had to look at that and say, we've got to move on, right? And I understand, like, looking at this, I've looked at this so many different ways. I understand where he went with it, right? Because at the end of the first half, yes, Cam was starting to move the ball a little bit better. There were moments, right? Like there were drives where Utah looked like, okay, maybe they can piece this together and they can get something going. A lot of that was mostly Mekhi Bernard, and I'll talk a little bit more about him later, but, he was getting things going in the ground game, and then there was a few passes that Cam could get that were helping, but by and large, things weren't working. So anyways, you go into the halftime break. At halftime, Cam Rising had thrown for 91 yards, already had one interception, his first of his season, one sack. That was the only sack he took that game. But was 7 of 19 passing. That's 36.8% for those that don't want to do the math. That is an incredibly low number. That's not an acceptable number to have, right? And I get that you'll live with that for some players like him who are trying to work through stuff and you're trying to get to where you need to be. Maybe if we give him extra time that things are going to change, right? I don't think that was there. There was no touch on the ball. He was either overthrowing passes or he was mostly underthrowing passes. You were starting to see guys like Brant Keithy, his guy, right? Like Brant Keithy and Cam Rising are like, they're tied at the hip in a lot of ways and on their friendship. You could see how frustrated that was making Keithy. You were seeing how frustrated it was making other players, because when you look at this, there were so many routes where players were open, and you could see Cam sitting in that pocket knowing that he just physically couldn't get there, right? He couldn't even get to the out route pass of a 7-yard play or even behind the line of scrimmage too often. It would just go at their feet. And so it became a very difficult situation for them, where you're frustrated because you can do this offense can move the ball, but Cam, your starting quarterback, the guy that you've loved forever, can't do it. And as players, it's not just about Cam, right? It's not just about a game. You're looking at somebody like a Brant Keithy who's got NFL aspirations, and even he's on a limited timeline. You've got Dorian Singer who's got NFL aspirations. All of these guys are trying to do something with their life. A majority of them won't probably sniff anything, and they'll probably just have this as their final spot. But there's guys that they're trying to get their stuff as well. And so when you have a quarterback back there, not only is it frustrating the offense because they can't move the ball, it's frustrating their ability to kind of put stuff on tape. It's frustrating everything all around because now the defense has to go back out there and do it. At the end of the day, this became a loyalty thing for Kyle Whittingham, where he said, look, he's meant so much to our program, we want to stick it out and go with him. And look, I personally, my opinion on this matters zero, right? Like I'm a reporter that covers the team. I'm not supposed to have an opinion in terms of like what I think Utah should do in terms of that kind of stuff, right? Like my job is to report it, present it to you as the fans, and let you make accurate decisions. But obviously, like you go into this game and you're watching this and you see this effort going into halftime, and you have to say, okay, they have to have that conversation to make that change. If they're not having that, that is you're not doing your job, because you have to have that conversation. So Kyle says that they essentially have that conversation. I don't know to what extent that was. If they came to him and says, Cam, you're not playing. Obviously, in those sound bites that I had you listen to, it was Cam saying that no, he was adamant that he could go. Look, I'm willing to stick with that, and I'm willing to say, okay, give him one more series in the second half. If things don't go well, you're going to pull him. The problem is it just never really got any better. And yeah, there were moments, right? I understand where you can look at that and say, okay, there were moments in the second half where Cam was doing better. And, maybe we were moving the ball a little bit better in their eyes, right? Like that's what you're looking at. At the end of the day, it just really turned into a situation of being too loyal to a player that has meant a ton to your program. But there comes a point where you have to cut your losses and say, look, Cam, you're not ready right now. Let's give it a look and do it. Like Kyle saying that Cam, being a veteran guy, would tell us when he can't go. Yes, that has happened in some situations, right? That Washington State game, you can kind of 2 years ago, you can say he said that he couldn't go. But when you're listening to all this noise, and I guarantee you Cam's heard this in some respects, right? As much as you want to avoid it and do all that, and I hope for his sake that he has avoided a lot of that, there's going to still be some hangover, right? I know his family's experienced that. I know there's people around him that has experienced that. That wears on you, and you get, it's exhausting, and you don't want to hear that. And so if you're thinking you're in this game, you have tremendous amount of confidence in your ability to kind of turn the tide. Of course, Cam's going to stay in there and say, I can do this. It's just a leg injury, whatever it is. Let's call it an ankle injury. I can stay out there. It's not bothering me right now. Do whatever you need to keep me going, and I'll do it. The problem was he just wasn't able to. And you have to, as a coach, be able to move on and say, Cam, you've meant so much to this program. This is not the way that it's going to go, but we've got to move on and we've got to do what we need to. And yeah, it puts Isaac Wilson in a tough spot, but you're looking at that. And Kyle's talked about this several times, saying, I have to go with the guy that is going to give us the best chance to succeed. And they didn't. At the end of the day, they didn't, right? Like, I know that he knows that. I know that he wants to be able to say that he did what he knows he needs to do, but at the end of the day, he went with the guy that he felt most loyal to. That's not a knock on Isaac Wilson. It's just more trying to give him, Cam Rising, a chance to be able to push forward and do what he needs to. Try to give him another chance to do it, because if he can play, or even if this was it, if they knew that this was probably his last game because of what the injury probably is going to be, they want to give him that one last, ride out on the sunset on your own high. And yeah, okay, you come out and you come win this game-winning drive and you beat Arizona State. And yeah, it's a team that you're not, probably supposed to win by that, close of a margin. But look, you did it. Now we're going to sit you the rest of the season because you're injured. At least you got out on a high, buddy. That kind of conversation. But it just never materialized, right? It just never came, and it changed the kind of dynamic of the game. And for an offense that was already struggling to kind of move the ball, especially in the red zone, once again, the play calling just didn't help, right? You have you have different scenarios, and I tweeted about this one. I try not to get into this one, but you have a play where, 3 to 5 plays prior, Cam Rising had just been rolled up, and they decide to flex him out and pretend like he's a receiver. Now, look, in no world am I imagining that Cam is going to be the receiver, right? But I think in a scripted play like this from Andy Ludwig, you have to kind of change that. You have to say, look, our quarterback is hurt, and any chance that we get to force him to run is only going to make matters the worst, right? Yeah, the play, had Charlie Vincent not dropped the ball, probably would have worked because it looked like a reverse to Money Parks, who had open field, and it's probably a touchdown. But at the same time, like it's not a play call that's advantageous to what you have out on the field. And if you have Cam Rising injured, it just doesn't work. And it could have, right? Look, I'm saying, like, if it works, I think that's a different story, because everybody's like, oh, it's a phenomenal play. Utah goes up and suddenly there's this different challenge. And maybe that's me that's at fault there for saying that. But I think it's plays like that, or plays down in the red zone where you're not actually trying to help your team. It kind of shows a massive coaching issue in terms of play calling and not being able to do it. And Andy Ludwig has been a fantastic play caller for Utah over the years, obviously helped Utah get to where they needed to in the Big 12 or the Pac-12 at their championship. So it's both sides, right? Like, where you have the successful offensive coordinator, but I think Utah's now at a point where this is starting to hurt them. We'll get a chance to talk to Andy Ludwig today, and I'm really curious to hear his thoughts on a lot of this stuff, if he's gonna talk to us about it. But, like, I want to know from his opinion why the red zone isn't working. Why isn't he able to do it? Why is he making these types of plays? But at the end of the day, you need an offense that is going to help players succeed, especially in the transfer portal era. You can't have an offense that is going to be so difficult for players to learn that they need a whole year to be able to do it, or else they can't see the field. If that's the case, you're in a world of hurt, and these guys are never going to transfer to your program. You're never going to get the players that you need to, because it just takes too long. Now, I'm not saying that there's not a lot of this that's going on the players either, right? Like, they have to learn the system. They have to get in. And no matter what offense you run, it takes time. But you have to be nimble and kind of adapt to the changing times of this. And I understand for somebody like Kyle and Andy Ludwig, as they're in their later part of their careers, that becomes a challenge, right? You're going to stick with what you know. At this point, why would you change anything? But I think you're getting into a system now where you're making it harder on your team to succeed, and you're losing your team because they're getting frustrated. And I am not going to go into details, because I don't think that's fair to these players. But there is a lot of frustration, more than just your general frustrations of losing a game, right? Like, they're in a spot where if you lose again, or things continue to be bad, I mean, there's a real chance you lose this team. And, I'm not saying that lightly, because I think this team is still kind of working in the same, what do you even want to call it? They're working in the same line, like, where they're working, pulling together. But at the same time, I think you're starting to see a lot of dissatisfaction with how the frustrations of this offense are going. It's not on one person necessarily. It's a combined effort. But at the same time, this is a team that is very close to a breaking point, in my opinion, right? Like, this is a team that needs something successful to help kind of revitalize things. If you have another dispirited kind of game against TCU this week, you really have to worry what this season could become, because if you can't beat a TCU team at home, and I'm not saying that TCU is not a good team, they have had some very bad games this year and have looked awful, but, like, if you can't beat TCU, I don't know that any game is going to get you up, right? It's not like TCU's some game that you're like, oh yeah, we have to get up because of XYZ. But at the same time, if you can't get up after this, knowing that Isaac Wilson is your full-time starter now, I think that becomes a world of hurt. And I think that's the trouble. So between the loyalty and the play calling and all that different stuff, I think this one 100% goes on the coaches, right? And I know Kyle at the end of the game said, you can pin everything on me. He's taking a lot of that as being the head coach and trying to take that. But this is an all-around effort, right? I think there's things that you've got to help your team succeed at, and there just wasn't it just didn't showcase, right? Like, if Cam really felt like he could do it, that's great, but you've got to have the ability to be able to say, this is the time where we need to pull him. This is the time where we have to make that change. And I know it's easy for me to sit there in the press box and say that this is the time, but it's harder as a player or as a coach to be in that environment and say, are we making the right choice? I've coached my kids in baseball for a long time. I've had my middle son, especially, he's a pitcher. And so we see him, and I can see when he, is starting to fade. Sometimes there's those where I have to say he has to work through it and he has to go and just continue to keep pitching. Other times I know he just hasn't, it's not his stuff that day, and he's got to be pulled. And it's the same with a lot of pitchers in baseball, right? You have to know at a point where you have to pull them, or else it spirals out of control, and you very well could lose a game because it allows walks and runs and different things that way. This, in those environments, and I will say it is tough to say, Do we pull him right now? Do we do that? So like, and mine is such a minor, so I'm not even going to sit here and say that it's on the same level. But if I'm having trouble trying to decide on when to pull a kid as a pitcher, in this competitive baseball environment that really means zero at the end of the day, you can see why it becomes a challenge for these coaches in an environment like this, where even though you have faith in Isaac and that healthily he is 100% and he can do the things that you want him to, why wouldn't you go with Cam Rising, right? Why wouldn't you? You would go with him because he's got the veteran play ability. He's got the ability to do what he needs to, and that becomes a challenge. And so you can see why they waited so long and why they continue to go. And then there becomes a point where there's kind of no turning back, right? Like you kind of have to say, we're just going to ride it to the end, because changing him with one series left in the game isn't going to do anything. So like some of that compounds on itself and makes it difficult, and it's not as easy of a choice as anybody is thinking. But like, that's what you're getting paid for, right? Like that's the things that you have to look at. That's the things that you have to kind of be willing to take that chance on. And unfortunately for Kyle and the Utah team and the players and everybody involved, it just didn't work out. And, there's a lot of second guessing that I'm guessing that was a lot of guessing right words right there. But anyways, there's a lot of second guessing right there that these coaches are going to have to look at and say, did we make the right choice? And it's easy to say that they didn't because they lost. But what if it worked, right? That's where it's always going to be. It's going to be a tough situation. But despite all this, despite all of the Cam Rising drama and all the different things there, Utah was still in a one-score game, right? Cam Scattaboo was absolutely dicing up Utah, but it wasn't, I would say it wasn't these huge, gashing plays all the time, right? There was times where, Kyle said that they missed 19 tackles on Friday. That absolutely rings true. So like, it's there. Cam Scattaboo is been great at being able to get guys to miss. So it's not just a Utah thing. This is all teams. But at the same time, Utah has been much more disciplined there. As I mentioned last week, they've held him to what I think it was 31 yards, the season before. And there's a lot of differences in that, so it's not fully the same. But for the most part, that defense had held him well, right? To within reason, right? It wasn't something that it was just like he's been rushing on him all day. He's up to 250 yards, and we just literally can't stop him. He was doing well. It wasn't until the end of the third quarter and the fourth quarter where it really just kind of rained on him, right? This is where all of a sudden Cam Scattaboo makes a couple misses in tackles and suddenly sprints down the field for a 50-yard touchdown run. Felt like the end of the world for a Utah team that couldn't move the ball. They were struggling. Everything was going on. But even after that 50-yard touchdown run, Utah still had two chances to score. They put themselves in a position to be able to do what they needed to. I should say two more chances where the game was still in reach, right? Not that it wasn't in reach at the very end because it was still a one-score game, but, within reason. So you get him scoring that 50-yard touchdown run. Utah then gets the ball. They mostly hold firm. Utah goes on a 10-play, 55-yard drive. But unfortunately, there's a holding penalty on 3rd and 5 that pushes them back to 3rd and 15. Rising then completes a pass to Mekhi Bernard for 7 yards. And so you're not. Once again, this is where, the struggle came, where you're in a 3rd and 15, and I'm not saying you had to get all of those 15 yards because that's a challenge. But on a 3rd down scenario, you've got to get a lot. And 7 yards is actually, it's good in that situation. It's still not quite considered a successful play because you needed much more yards there. You have to have technically 100% of yards for it to be successful on a 3rd down, even if it is 3rd and long. That's just the nature of it. Yes, you're in 4th down territory, and so it works. But that's the nature of it. 7 yards just isn't going to cut it. You've got to be able to look for more. You'll take the 7 yards because that prepares you for a 4th and 8th, but you've got to be able to get more. So whatever. You get to the 4th and 8th scenario. This is a situation where Utah faced in Arizona, where do you kick the ball? You take the free points. You get there. Yeah, the deficit is still, you're still in a deficit, but at least you're closer. Maybe it gives you a chance that if you go down and you kick a field goal, I can't remember. I think they would have taken the lead by a point or they would have tied it. I can't remember, and I forgot to put that in my notes. But you go down and you have, that scenario where it's either that or you decide to risk it and go for points. Utah's trying to go for the points, right? And crazy enough, it almost works. kind of. Rising completes a pass to Money Parks for 4 yards, but Cam Rising is pressured. He has to do it quickly, and nothing works, and it's a turnover on downs. And you know why it didn't is because they knew Cam Rising was injured. He can't make the deep passes for the most part. He had a few, and deep probably not right. It's probably more intermediate. But he made a few, and that will help you. But they're going to load up that box and they're going to put pressure on him. And so the QB hurry was there, and he had to dump it off quickly to Money Parks for 4 yards, and nothing materialized from that. Okay, so you get the turnover on downs, so be it. Utah then holds the next series, goes well. They get the stop. I think it was a 4 and out for Arizona State. And then Utah, because they're in plus territory, they're in Arizona State territory, you're thinking, okay, this is their chance finally. They can do it again. They get a 10-yard pass to open it up. First down, everything's great. You're moving the ball. The next down, first and second downs, it's a run play to Mekhi Bernard, 0 yards on that. They weren't plays that were really going to be advantageous for him. They're right up the gut. They didn't work. They were going to load up that box and force something else, and Utah goes nowhere. You then go 3rd and 10. Rising completes a pass to Dorian Singer for 7 yards. It looks great, right? Like, okay, so yeah, you didn't fully get another successful play because it was only 7 yards again on 3rd down, but at least you're 3 yards, to the first down marker this time. You're on the 12-yard line. There's a good shot that you can do it. The next play actually worked phenomenally. Despite all of the struggles and the frustrations that have been had, everything works well. Rising completes a 12-yard pass to Micah Pittman. Everything's great. It's a touchdown. Everything is looking up for Utah. Hey, maybe they did the right thing. They kept Cam Rising in. Oh, wait, it's got called back for a personal foul. I don't know, man. Like this, it was a ticky-tack. If anything, it's a tough situation for Utah. At the end of the day, they chose to call that. That's what happens. So now Utah kicks their field goal. You're down, whatever you are, but that margin just hasn't gotten there. So in the 2 chances that you had, yes, you got one of them as a field goal, and technically it was a touchdown before that, so you can consider it a success, but you hampered yourself on that first drive because you went for it on 4th down, 4th and 8, mind you, in a situation that wasn't going to work, on a night that just wasn't going to work for Cam Rising, and you decided to go with that. So that's when then the next drive, Cam Scattaboo then breaks once again for 47-yard touchdown. It felt like, especially in that game, the 51-yard or 50-yarder, it hurt Utah, and I think it really kind of turned the tide and said, okay, there's no chance, but they still fought. The 47-yarder was just kind of, it just absolutely killed. And so I was on the field at that point. The emotions in that stadium were pretty high. You had an Arizona State fandom that was just living life, right? Everything was going great, and yet Utah still had the ball with 2:41 left to essentially look to try to tie the game. And as much as that became a difficult challenge, everything kind of worked their way in some respects. Utah starts moving the ball down the field, they're getting down, and then suddenly Cam Rising throws an interception. It turned out to be his 3rd interception. It just didn't work out, and you feel for him because that's the last pass that he's ever going to have at Utah, most likely. And it didn't work, but once again, it just wasn't. The loyalty ran out, and you left a guy in that just couldn't do it. And then once again, it's not a knock necessarily to Cam. It's just the nature of what it is. Utah had a struggle with that. He ends with 209 yards, 3 interceptions on 16 of 37 passing. That's 43%, which would be his lowest ever that he's thrown in a game. So I think he was lower in the Penn State game, but he didn't complete that game, so I'm not going to really count that. Granted, that game wasn't going in Utah's favor, so maybe he could have been around there. But at the end of the day, this is a full complete game for him. Throws 43%. That's not going to cut it. It just wasn't there. End of the grades come out from Pro Football Focus. He scores a 45.5 grade on offense and a 44.4 on passing. Just not good enough. Just in comparison, and I'm only comparing this just to kind of give the value, but Isaac Wilson, in his 3 starts that he's had, Utah State, his passing grade was a 73.5. Obviously a great game for him. It wasn't perfect by any means, but he showed kind of some moxie and did what he needed to. Oklahoma State was his worst in terms of passing. It just wasn't as great. He graded out a 35.8. So, yes, lower than what Cam did, but remember, he's a freshman, and also he split reps with Cam that week because if you remember right, Cam was expected to be the starter that week, or at least expected to give it a go, and so Isaac didn't really get a lot of the reps that he needed to. That's not necessarily an excuse that fits fully, but at the same time, there were some reasons for some of the struggles, but it was still not a perfect game for Isaac. And then the Arizona game, Isaac has a passing grade of 56.8, so improved. So at the end of the day, even at, we'll say, Isaac's worst, he's still at least on par, or if not better than what Cam did. So, it's tough, and I've gone on probably too long with this, but at the same time, I think there came a point where Utah just needed to kind of rip the Band-Aid off and just go with it. And just stick with Isaac and figure that out. And now that's where they're going to go, and we'll talk more about that as we continue out this season. But on one hand, this is a great thing for Utah. They now essentially have their starting quarterback of the future. You get those reps in now. Whether Utah contends for a Big 12 title or not, and I know, in theory and on paper, it's still within reason. I don't think that really matters now. I think you're building for the future. You're trying to get some positive momentum, and if you do compete for that, so be it, and you take that. But this is now kind of turning into get the team ready for next year. I know nobody wants to hear that, and I know there's a lot of questions surrounding this team going into the offseason, and maybe that has to do with Kyle Whittingham's future in terms of if he wants to hang it up or not. Only he can answer that, essentially. But I think you have to kind of look at that, whether Utah wanted to or not, and say this was kind of the path that they needed to go down. And so now Isaac has the full trust of the team. Some of it is kind of forced, but I think they truly do believe in him. This isn't a thing where they feel like they're in a world of hurt like they were last year, where they just couldn't get certain things done based on their quarterback room. Brandon Rose is the number 2 quarterback, but there's no quarterback competition here, right? Barring Isaac just absolutely being terrible. I don't think you see Brandon Rose, and even if Isaac is terrible, I honestly don't know that you go with that, because I think you're trying to get Isaac to work out the kinks and really just kind of get better, right? Get those reps, and that's what's going to improve him going into the next year. So let's look, as we end this podcast, let's look at some positives, because there were some positive in this game. And number 1 has to be Mekhi Bernard. He finishes with 129 yards and 1 touchdown on 21 carries. He averaged 6.1 yards, got a 70.3 grade in Power or Pro Football Focus. A pretty good 81.2 in pass blocking too. So, he did his job all around. This was a guy that when everything was kind of struggling and people were frustrated with what was going on and everything, this is a guy that continued to work, right? He sees his opportunity. He knows that this is what he has to do, and he absolutely kept Utah in that game. He worked tremendously to showcase his talent. For as much as what Cam Scadaboo was doing, Mekhi Bernard was equally doing that. It broke more for Cam Scadaboo, I should say, at the end of the game, where he was able to kind of make those bigger impact plays. But phenomenal effort from Mekhi Bernard. If I remember right, this is his 4th 100-yard rushing game of the season. He's really established himself as the RB1. Kyle Whittingham says he still needs to be in that range of 20 carries or so. So I don't think you're going to see too much more of an input, or an output, I should say, on the field. But they need more than just him, right? You've got to be able to have other guys and figure this out where you can get more players on the field. And now that this whole Cam Rising saga is kind of wrapped up in a way that we don't necessarily have to talk about it on a week-to-week basis, I think those are the next questions we have to ask. What's going on in the quarterback room, or it just defaulted in the running back room, and what's going on there. Because as much as Mekhi has done well, you need more guys, right? And if not for just, injury's sake, you need more people. So good thing for Mekhi Bernard. Outside of that, also the run game dominance on the offensive line was pretty tremendous. Spencer Fano continues to show some tremendous strides as an offensive lineman. He's right tackle. He graded out as the highest player there with a 91 overall grade, but he had a tremendous 94.4 run blocking grade. His pass grade wasn't, up to snuff necessarily, and that's an area where he has to continue to improve. But his run blocking ability has been tremendous this season. And, it's been pretty remarkable to see kind of what he's been able to do. He's continuing to grow. He's a sophomore. There's a lot more room there. But this is a guy that is doing a great job. Caleb Lomo on the other side is doing really well. Not quite to that level yet, but doing well as well. Miki Sugarataga and Carson Ryan, 2 tight ends, they graded out really high in the run. So there's a lot of great success there. Even the rest of your offensive linemen, Jaron Kump, 84.9 passing grade, so he was good on that side. Michael Mokafisi is 79.7 in the run. Tanoa Togiai, 77 on the run. The real problem is starting to come in this interior pressure, especially in the passing game. The passing grades on the interior side of that offensive line have been awful. It hasn't been great, and that's where Utah really needs to improve. You have to be optimistic about the run blocking, and maybe that's because they're seeing a lot more of that's improving. But for this Utah team to advance beyond just, trying to get Isaac up to the level that they need him, that offensive line needs to be better in pass pro. And, if they can't get there, that's going to be another long day, and it's going to be a challenge. And so some great things from them, but it's not quite all success yet. So that's kind of where we're going to go at with today. I know it's pretty heavy on the Cam Rising stuff, and, we got to get it out of the system, I guess, but you hate to see it for him. It's a tough thing to be able to go out like that and not necessarily go out on your own. We'll see if he gets any more reps this year. I would be surprised, just the nature of the injury and kind of where it's at in the season. But I think now the attention turns to Isaac Wilson, and that can be a great thing for Utah as they now kind of can focus in on one player and not play the will he, won't he game. So we'll see how that goes. We'll see kind of what the conversations are around him and kind of how that develops. But this is a team that now has to kind of figure out what they're going to do moving on. So we'll sign off, and we'll go to next week or later this week as we prepare to talk about TCU. So see you later.